Okay, well, let's get started. Our third presenter today is Jay Kamm. Jay is the senior planner at Northern Maine Development Commission, where he has worked since 1993, writing comprehensive plans and land use ordinances for municipalities in Aroostook County. Jay administers both the state transportation and land use technical assistance contracts and is the project manager for NMDC's Brownfield Assessment Program, with over 45 properties assessed and redeveloped. Jay lives in Caribou and is looking forward to going to camp in a couple of weeks. Jay, thank you for joining us today to discuss the subdivision review criteria. We have a few polling questions to start off this session. So our first question asked about hiring outside consultants, and we have almost 2/3 of our respondents saying they rarely hire consultants to help.
Well, that to me is very interesting. First, I guess I'd like to thank Shelley for asking me to be here today. Or as Shelley said, I'm in Aroostook County, and I'm going to be right up front with everybody. Subdivision activity in the county has been really pretty minimal since probably the late 1990s. And as a result, I think that's problematic, mainly because we have certainly generations of planning board members that don't know, I don't want to say, how do I say this carefully, that have been probably not even looking at what a subdivision is. And I guess the issue that we have is we're starting to see some subdivision activity now. And in a lot of cases, they're in our smaller communities that are located maybe on outstanding river segments. I'm thinking Allagash, Fort Kent, and others. They have a very part-time code enforcement officer, an extremely part-time planning board, and maybe even a part-time to a couple of hour a week town office opening. So the concern has always been, what are we doing? What are we looking at? How do we do this? So that we're in compliance and that we really are looking out for the best interest of the municipality. And as John said, the future homeowner or property owner of that subdivision. In most cases, what we're seeing is a lot of recreational properties that are part of subdivisions. So they're subdividing lands along these rivers or lakes, for recreational properties and that kind of thing. So I think it's very timely, and I hope to be able to use some of this recording in the future planning board trainings because, one, do we actually have a subdivision? And two, what do we do if we do think we have a subdivision in those? I'm assuming everybody can see my screen on the PowerPoint. That's okay?
Yes, it is. We've launched a second poll question, Jay.
Great.
And we have a third question that we're going to ask as well. Okay.
Environmental criteria, that certainly is not unique to the AVCOG service area. It's something that our communities here are having problems with. And it's one of the, I guess, areas where I do recommend that, certainly municipalities and the review authority look at maybe hiring outside assistance to help with some of the criteria. When you look at Maine stormwater management design manuals, some of the, well, I'll get into it, but some of the calculations are pretty intense, and it's something that maybe a lay planning board and a part-time code enforcement officer may not have the ability to review. So I'm going to jump in and I think change my slide here, which for whatever reason. Now that we've determined if we have a subdivision, thanks to John and Lee J, there actually are some subdivision review criteria that need to be considered when reviewing that and before a municipal review authority is granting approval. As John mentioned, there are 21 criteria that must be reviewed. And I know I see it all the time. It seems daunting to those planning boards. But I always tell the planning board to remember that the burden of proof is always on the applicant, who really is required to gather this information and provide it in a way that it meets the municipal or meets the municipal satisfaction. And that's not something that should be taken lightly. And we've had towns, and I can see them here in the central Aroostook area, that really were working with the developer, and we're doing and paying for engineering and those kind of things. And it just didn't make any sense that, why are you doing this when actually you're going to be the one reviewing it? My tip is, especially for a planning board that has never reviewed a subdivision before, is consider making a checklist. And I think that, Phil and John and Lee J mentioned the finding of facts. At least a checklist, you'll go down and you can check off every one of the 21 criteria. Say, yes, we reviewed this, have some notes and those kind of things. So that way, when you develop your final finding of facts, you at least have a good set of notes. You haven't missed anything. The developer knows that you've done it. You know that you've done it. And it's, a good way of making sure that everyone is engaged. What are the criteria? As I mentioned, there's 21. And I know pollution and the environmental criteria seem to be the one where municipalities are having the most issue. They really, the number one criteria is interrelated with a number of other criteria. And I think at a minimum, not at a minimum, you will not, the subdivision will not result in undue water or air pollution. So you really need to consider elevation of the land above sea level. I know Lee J had some great plans that showed topography, had pictures or delineation of floodplains and those kind of things. I believe that there was some soils. I had a hard time seeing some of his plans, but soil delineation, are those soils actually adequate for waste disposal? I'm hoping, what is the slope? We certainly want to make sure that the lots are not all on such steep slopes that, the development can occur, that erosion doesn't occur. The availability of streams for the disposal, where are they located? North Arrow would be one that's certainly not a pollution, but something where you want to be looking at in any applicable state or local health and water resource rules and regulations, subsurface wastewater, internal plumbing, those kind of things. As I mentioned, the environmental criteria really is interrelated. Criteria 4, which is erosion, criteria 13, floodplains, wetlands, groundwater. So really you want to have maps or available that show those drainage areas above, below, and on the site. I think John mentioned a subdivision around the golf course that he's working at where there's drainage issues. We see drainage issues all of the time in Aroostook County on old subdivisions. And quite frankly, it probably was not reviewed, to the standards that they are today. But, dumping water onto abutting properties, dumping sediment into existing road ditches and those kind of things. Stormwater, I guess, as I mentioned, the stormwater design manual, phosphorus calculations, the sewage disposal criteria. Are you using municipal? Are you using private systems? And solid and hazardous waste disposal. Some of them are fairly easy. Some of them truly are not. easy and require, I think, quite a bit of time on the part of the planning board to be looking at it. We always recommend that you have some maps of surface waters, your wetlands, or your aquifers, the list of solid and hazardous waste that may be generated by the subdivision. In most cases, if it's a residential subdivision, residential subdivision, it's actually fairly simple. You know, there's some things, but if it's a commercial, which I know is changing, that may in fact be a little bit different. Also, would there be any spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans for those hazardous wastes? Sufficient water is the number 2 criteria that a planning board and review authority really needs to be looking at. And is there sufficient water available in the reasonably foreseeable future for that subdivision? And I think that what we really are considering is what type of system, is it adequate, fire needs, emergency needs, and then the maintenance of the system. In most cases, in our subdivisions in Aroostook County, they are private systems, so they're drilling some form of wells. So really what the planning boards have been looking at is really some kind of letter or statement from a well driller. Yes, I've drilled wells in this area. I've had to go to, I'm gonna throw a number out, 200 feet. And we're hitting, 2.5 gallons per minute replenishment in a relatively short answer. In some cases, and I have not seen it, where they've required an engineer or a geologist, but for the most part, I think the well driller from a private standpoint. The other, I guess, statement would be if you're looking at a municipal water supply, can the municipal, the district actually support the subdivision, the number of units being developed and those kind of things, where are the locations of things and that. Again, the more information that you have in the plan, the better off you are as a municipal planning board of reviewing those kind of things. And I guess the other instance, we really want to look at who's maintaining the system. Are there any legal agreements that are going to be in place? Who's doing that? You want to be very clear up front that if it's a water district or a water department, that they know that this is going to happen. It's not something that's a surprise, or if there's an association that's doing something along those lines. Kind of along the same lines, municipal water supply. You don't want to cause an unreasonable burden on the existing municipal water supply if one is to be used. We're running into a situation like that right now in Caribou, where there's an old school that is being subdivided into about 20 residential units. And we're not entirely sure that while there's certainly an adequate water supply, I think the system supplying the building may not in fact be adequate. And there's some concerns certainly with the water supply out on the existing road. So again, we need to be considering, what is the supply? Are there enough for fire capabilities? The financial aspect of things. Who's actually going to pay? The Caribou Utilities District, and I'm sure all utilities districts are the same. We'll supply water to the front of the building, but you're putting it from the road to the building itself. And really, again, you probably want some statements on the system operator, maybe from your fire chief, from the town or the district that's supplying it, engineers, those kind of things on the design and the layout of that. And that's really why I go back to say at the very beginning that you don't want the town to be gathering this information. They're going to be asked to look at this. The fire chief, maybe the public works director, who knows, if you have a water or sewer, solid waste disposal, really are going to be looking at these and say, yeah, we can do that. So you don't want to be kind of generating your own information to be looking at it. Erosion is really one of the big issues that we've had in the county. And I kind of threw some funny looking pictures in here, but it's been a problem all along for us, in that we want to make sure that there's no unreasonable soil erosion or a reduction of the capacity to hold water. And I think that we need to be looking at where are the steep slopes, where are the poor soils, what is the road and drainage system for construction. We've seen, and it's probably not the review, but it's probably a good time to be talking about it. You know, a developer has a 10-acre parcel, dividing it into 10 lots, and what's the first thing they do? Tear up 5 acres and all of the topsoil, put it in a big pile with no sediment control or erosion control systems in place. And what's the first thing that happens? You get your thunderstorms in June, July, and a lot of that soil ends up on the abutting property owner. It ends up in brooks or streams or water bodies, or it ends up in the road ditch or in the road. So again, you want plans that are showing wetlands and your surface waters, topographic of maps, soil maps, and any information on those soils. What is your erosion control plan? And then your stormwater management plan also. Traffic is one that a lot of communities don't seem to consider, and yet in some cases really have created some issues. And I know John and Lee J both alluded to the problem. We've seen small local roads that really were designed for a small amount of traffic all of a sudden have a subdivision, 10 or 15 lots or more in the back, go from 10 to 15 cars per day to 30, 40, 50. And it's really changed, I think, the neighborhood. It's changed maybe safety issues when in regards to pedestrians, or children walking to school and those kind of things. At the same time, we've had developers who really wanted to put access and entries to their subdivisions onto state roads. And what's the first thing they do? Right on the crest of a hill. There's no sight distance. They can't meet the sight distance. And that's really where the planning boards can sit down and work with the developer to look at, how do we do this? How do we make the access to the subdivision fit? What are you generating for volumes? Again, I just alluded to pedestrian traffic. We've actually had a town, I think there was a question on, I get it wrong, Pine Acres, that actually had the developer do some road construction work to meet what the projected traffic volumes was going to be. And they were happy to do that because it was a fairly desirable piece of property in a desirable area. So they knew that they were going to get their money back for doing that. I think we need to be certainly talking about into the fire chief. Can we get emergency vehicles up into those subdivisions? Can we make sure that there's adequate places for ambulance, those kind of things, police? And this is, to me, a very good situation where the municipality probably could have outside assistance. Traffic studies, engineering studies really can be pretty sophisticated. And in my humble opinion, a lot of planning boards may not have the expertise on board to really know what the developer is saying, especially if it's a relatively sophisticated developer. I know I'm speaking to the choir. In a lot of areas, we get a lot of snow. I'm sure you guys have had some already this year. We want to make sure that snow plows can turn around, the school buses can get in to certain areas, and that a new subdivision certainly is not creating more issues on the part of the municipal finances. Another good source of information that oftentimes is free is certainly the Maine Department of Transportation. Our regional engineers will help and look at some of these subdivisions and some things. So they'd be one of the first that I would look at. Certainly they're going to issue a permit or not issue a permit, but probably should be working with them sooner rather than later if you're looking at state roads. Sewage disposal is one we haven't seen a lot of issues in the past. but that's not to say that we don't. We want to make sure that there is adequate waste disposal and that we're not placing an unreasonable burden on municipal services if they are utilized. I think this goes back to the question earlier on is, how does subdivision review protect property owners? Well, or potential property owners, and I think this is a good area. You're not buying a lot where you can't put a subsurface wastewater disposal system, or that there isn't going to be municipal services there. And we've seen some of those in the past. Again, mainly older subdivisions, but people are buying non-buildable parcels of property thinking that they were going to be able to put some things on there. So again, things to consider: what are the conditions? What are the soil types? Is it a state plumbing code? If you're having a centralized system, how many are going to be served? Who's going to maintain that? Is it a homeowner association? Is it, private individuals, whoever? Again, what you want to put in is on the map, on the layout, a statement of it is an individual system. It's clustered. Where are the test pits? Make sure you show those on your plans and on your maps. Some kind of letter from a site evaluator saying, yeah, we can put them in here. We've looked at those and it's good. Maybe a professional engineer if it's a centralized system or not. Or maybe some other services through the Department of Human Services. If it's a public system, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of a situation that we had in a couple of municipalities. Again, what is the volume, the type, the flow, the design, capacity? You'd really want your sewer superintendent to review and provide some findings. You want Maine DEP to look at that, and a professional engineer to be looking at the design, the capacity, any restrictions. We've actually had two older subdivisions on municipal sewer systems. One was along the St. John River, and the system was actually built at the, I'll use this term loosely, at the request of the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, because there were water quality issues with the existing development there. So the system was designed really with a minimal excess capacity. Well, over time, there was single lot development, and then all of a sudden someone wanted to put a subdivision because, again, you're on the St. John River. We now have more and more people looking at that as a resource, and determined that there was really no capacity for the amount of homes that were being presented. The right, wrong, or indifferent, the sewer department actually put in a kind of a clustered system, and they said that they would maintain that until certain things happened, and they realized that maybe in the distant future there was going to be a capacity upgrade for that. I found it rather interesting that the sewer department was willing to do that for a developer, but I believe that the town felt that the increase in revenues and that would offset many of those costs in the future. I think the same thing happened down in Soldier Pond, which is part of the Eagle Lake Water and Sewer District, where they put in a clustered system along Soldier Pond, so that area could be developed in such a way, and they were realizing and protecting the water quality. Again, it's rather interesting. Municipal solid waste disposal is another one. You don't want to create a lot of a burden on the ability to dispose of the solid waste and how municipal services are going to be used. In most cases, we have 2 landfills here in Aroostook County, but I think there's 12 or 13 transfer stations. And for the most part, all of the disposal is through a private entity. So we typically ask for, something from a hauler saying, yeah, I can service that. We're not asking necessarily, that they're going to to be the hauler, but we get some things. The solid waste director, may fortunate or unfortunate, is one director in Aroostook County. You know, he typically writes a letter. Yeah, we have enough statement that we can certainly handle any volume that's generated through these types of development. So that really has been, at least in Aroostook County, that has been really a minor thing. Aesthetics, cultural, and natural values will not have undue adverse impact on scenic or natural beauty of the area, aesthetic, historic, or significant wildlife habitat. We are actually running into this particular review criteria right now in the town of Allagash. For those that don't know, Allagash is kind of at the end of the road, northwest of Fort Kent. Is a large deer wintering area in the along the entire town, which is along the St. John River. And there's also a proposed 10-lot subdivision, which happens to be right in the middle of that deer wintering area. And it really has, I don't want to say been contentious, but I know that Inland Fisheries and Wildlife has been trying to get the deer out of downtown. That's kind of funny, out of Allagash, mainly because it's a high-hit area, you know, and we're looking at traffic and increased traffic. And there's been certainly some feeding issues. So they're trying to do some things, and they're trying to actually work with a developer to say, how do we to keep the deer, you know, out of this subdivision? We want to make sure that, you know, any feeding of the deer, and maybe that's not a review criteria, but it's something to consider. What do we, you know, how do we do that to protect the wildlife that's there? It's actually kind of interesting because people are buying those lots because they like seeing the deer in the winter when they're up there, you know, snowmobiling, and it's nice to see those kind of things. So you want to determine what the impact of the natural areas are to the habitat. Is there any historic or archaeological resources along there? We've, you know, Native Americans, those kind of things. The scenic resources, we're seeing more and more of the development, especially along the St. John River, that hillsides are now becoming, you know, subdivisions. So people paddling the river. At one point, we're looking at kind of a scenic, and I don't want to call it wild, but maybe the feeling of a wild river, are now starting to see, you know, 6, 7, 8 residential units along the river. There are a lot of resources available. There's critical areas. Inland Fisheries, at least in our area, has been extremely helpful, working with the planning boards to say, here's what we have, here's how maybe we can do some things, and they've worked with a developer. The Maine Historic Preservation Commission will do some work, and they will provide statements. And again, I think you want to make sure the maps have vistas and shorelines identified so that we know what we're looking at and where. Conformity with local plans and ordinances. I can't speak for your region, but I know in many cases, a lot of our municipalities don't have local comprehensive plans, and don't, in some cases, have even local ordinances, maybe with the exception of shoreline zoning. But if you do, you want to make sure that the subdivision regulation ordinance is in compliance with and is looking at, you know, are you meeting the goals of the plan or the ordinances? And I think the thing that you certainly want to consider is all of your municipal ordinances. You know, what does your comprehensive plan say? Is this subdivision being located in an area where you really wanted subdivisions to go, or is it an area that, you know, really it shouldn't be going? And any regulations on state or federal law that you want to be looking at. Again, local ordinances, you know, is it meeting all of your ordinances? And John, I think, was really clear and good that there's a lot of different definitions out there when you're looking at things, and you just want to be clear that your local ordinances or the development or the proposal is kind of meeting a lot of those different definitions. the goals of the comprehensive plan. Town of Fort Kent has a very good comprehensive plan, and yet has a number of subdivisions that have gone in to the west of the community, again along the St. John River, in an area that was really kind of looked at from being a protected area. And I don't want to resource protection, but it was kind of like, well, we really would prefer, you know, subdivisions and more intense urban or residential development to be closer to municipal services. So I don't know if they've done a real good job at looking at the goal of the comprehensive plan when they're doing that. And again, I sometimes think, with all due respect, that a lot of these planning boards are, you know, development at all costs will help drive the bulldozer. And they tend to forget that there's been probably some planning that's been done in the past. Financial and technical capacity. Does the developer actually have the capacity to meet the standards of the section? We are running into that in one of the towns that I've worked with, and that's the town of Easton. A developer actually had completed a subdivision application and started to do a lot of the work and ran out of money. And unfortunately, the town ended up taking over that subdivision and really did, I think, a nice job kind of fixing a bad situation, to the point where they've taken over some of the land and bought some of the land, budding land, and developing, you know, some additional things. Basically, what happened was that the developer started to build a road, got halfway through it and decided they couldn't meet road design standards that the town had. Some of the other things was, you know, well, okay, we're going to put in some wells. That didn't happen, and power and some other things. So really what the town should have been looking at, is there a letter from a financial institution saying there is capacity? The town did not ask for any kind of bonds or letters of credit. Again, maybe they should have. And there was really no third-party inspection. Again, a small town located on the, I hate to use the term, but it's a bedroom community to Presque Isle. So there was some development pressure, and they're saying, well, this is going to go well. Well, they ended up taking it over and working on it. Surface water and outstanding rivers, I did kind of allude to those, that we're having some subdivision pressure on some of these. If it's located entirely partially within a watershed of any pond or lake within 250 feet, the subdivision will not adversely affect the water quality or affect the shoreline of that water body. And on outstanding river segments, normal high water mark of 500 feet. Again, in Allagash, they certainly are far beyond the 500 feet. It just is the makeup of the subdivision and the makeup of the way the land is located, that you're actually looking at some of the vistas and those kind of things. So you really do want to consider your local shoreline zoning. Again, making sure that your application meets the shoreline zoning. What is the impact to the shoreline, erosion? Sometimes that's hard. We just had a code enforcement meeting last week where some of these subdivisions of the past, you know, as they develop, you know, the first thing that the homeowner or property owner wants to do is put in paths and those kind of things. And, you know, there's erosion issues that are occurring. Is there some form of plan or DP permit, or I should say erosion and sediment control plan, that are in place? What is that? Does that actually meet, you know, what DEP and others are looking for? Vegetative buffers. We've run into some issues, again, having a code enforcement meeting last Friday or 2 Fridays ago. There's been kind of a lack of communication between the DEP with the NRPA and what's really being permitted and what's not being permitted. You know, some of the code enforcement officers do take it upon themselves to go in and look and or ask, but I think that there's a move afoot, again, at least in our region, that there's hopefully going to be better communication between DEP and the community. We are also fortunate, and I can't speak for other areas of the state, that our DEP regional office really has taken a proactive role in land use and in land use planning. So they have been working with municipalities, they've been working with the code enforcement officers. You know, here's really where we have some issues, and they're kind of working through issues. They're not the reviewing authority, they're not telling the town what to do, but they are there as a technical resource. And it's been, I think, very good. The new regional director is basically saying the same thing. He wants to continue that relationship. And he's been working also to try to get new shoreland zoning staff up in our region, because we did not have shoreland zoning staff. I believe it was north of Bangor. Groundwater considerations. Are you going to impact the quality or quantity of groundwater? What is the quality? What is the quantity? Wetlands certainly are a recharge area. Are we impacting those wetlands? How are we impacting that? Sewage disposal, you know, are the soils adequate for sewage disposal? Again, are we going to have any sort of impact to the groundwater? Is there going to be any solid, liquid, or hazardous waste storage or handling? You want to make sure you have aquifers delineated on your maps. Are the lots adequate for on-site sewer and water? A couple that we've looked at in the past I hate to use it, but in Mapleton, really had to go almost to a 2-acre minimum lot size just in order to have good water and on-site sewer and being able to locate wells and systems. What are your impervious areas? And what are your drainage patterns? And again, that goes back to certainly your topography that Lee J showed in some of his things. Really, what is your information needed? Is the wetland a recharge area? Yes or no? How deep are your wells going to be? Where are we looking at? Are there any materials or waste that are going to be handled at the subdivision? For the most cases, I would say no. We've had very little of that kind of information that being required. But again, it checked the box. Yeah, we're not going to be doing that. Is there any spill prevention or control or countermeasure plan in place? Is there use of a best management practice? Flood areas, I noted again on one of Lee J's maps that there was very clear delineation of where the floodplains were. I think if the subdivider is actually going to be in a floodplain, what is the 100-year flood elevation and what are the boundaries within that subdivision? And really you must meet the requirements of Maine's floodplain management, so that the lowest floor, including the basement, is at least 1 foot above the 100-year elevation. It's pretty clear, in my humble opinion, that homeowners insurance really doesn't cover floods. So the planning board and the review authority certainly wants to look at the impacts of development on floodplains, the impact of the people and the land. Are you creating a problem? Are you exasperating a problem? Or are you building in a problem? You want to be looking at, the flood maps, again, at your elevations and at flood proofing and ensuring that, no, it's not the case. This is actually freshwater wetlands. Again, kind of goes back to the whole environmental review. The number 14 is where are the freshwater wetlands located within the proposed subdivision? And we highly recommend that freshwater wetland mapping be done with the help of someone, a professional, be it an engineer, be it a biologist. Here, our local soil and water conservation districts will help out. And I believe it's probably through funding available through either NRCS or local funding that they have, but they actually will help in many cases with the mapping of that. So where are the subdivision boundaries? What are the impacts on those wetlands? Are you in compliance with the Natural Resource Protection Act and with shoreline zoning? Again, very different definitions in a number of different things. We want to make sure that we are meeting all of those definitions. I'm going to jump back to 14A, which is farmland, and I think John hit the nail on the head. You know, farmland does need to be shown on the map and identified. And it's one of the concerns that a number of our planning boards are having now is, okay, what do we do with that? You know, Aroostook County, as with many other areas, is known for farmland. And I'll be honest with you, the Christmas tree question, I was hoping something John was going to answer, because that is one that we're being asked right now in two communities that have some subdivision application. You know, does that meet farmland? I don't know the answer to that. River, stream, and brook. Make sure all river, streams, and brooks are identified as part of the application. And again, make sure you know what the definition of that is. 6 months flowing water, I think was the definition that was used, and that certainly has been a change in the past. Again, what's the water quality? What's the location of river, streams, or brooks? What is the subdivision going to do as far as erosion? Is it going to change the hydrology of the brook or stream? Is there going to be any kind of increased flow that could cause problems downstream, that can cause problems either within the subdivision itself? Stormwater management, you need to provide adequate stormwater management. I've said a couple of times that there's Maine Stormwater Management Design Manuals, which the Maine DEP developed in 2016, that really contain a lot of excellent information that planning boards, I guess the hard part is being familiar with, but certainly needs to be looking at and considering. But I think that, you know, in my mind, when you look at the manual, there's a couple of things in there. One is, you know, how can the development fit the natural topography? And if you have stormwater or a large part of your development that's on steep slopes, can the developer kind of tweak some things so that you're not really looking at as much development or impervious soils or impervious development on areas of steep slope? Will drainage systems divert runoff from natural channels or wetlands or streams? We run into a ton of problems with older subdivisions that are, as I said, dumping water onto abutting property owners where it had never gone before, just because of the way the stormwater management was designed. Again, I don't think it was malicious. I just think that that was the way things were done in the past. That's certainly changing now. I guess I'll leave it at that. That's changing now. I think that the developers certainly are more sophisticated. Planning boards are more sophisticated so that they know what they're asking for. As I mentioned, calculations according to the DEP manual should be probably done by a professional engineer. We run into a lot of issues even today with, is the drainage system adequately sized? Again, I hate to go back to John, but I think he mentioned the retention ponds or those kind of things. We see that a lot. Spring runoff here in Aroostook County with 150 inches of snow. There's a lot of water coming down through some of these places in a relatively short period of time. Certainly our seasons seem to be more compressed. Spring runoff, which in the past used to be 3 or 4 weeks, now is oftentimes a week to 2 weeks. So there's a lot of water that may be coming down or through an area. And where we see some issues is long-term maintenance plan and responsibility. Who actually is going to maintain that? It's nice to have it, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. There's some problems. Who's actually going to be the one? I mean, the developer may in fact be not necessarily long gone, but is there a homeowner, again, association? Is it the homeowner who's going to do that. I don't think it should be the responsibility of the municipality, but I think in some cases that has happened out of necessity. It protects, as Lee J said, the municipality needs to protect itself and needs to address the concerns of the abutting landowner saying, why all of a sudden am I getting, 4 inches of water up against my house? Spaghetti lots are prohibited. I guess the short answer is you can't have a ratio of greater than 5 to 1. We have not seen a lot of that, but this was something that I believe someone at AVCOG had put this slide together. You can kind of tell what they are. The St. John Valley is renowned for spaghetti lots, and it was basically the way land development occurred back in the 1800s, early 1900s, and having access to water and having access to field and a lot of kids where everybody got a lot. So you want to make sure that you don't have your 5 to 1 ratio. Make sure that it's there. Show it on a map, plan it on the map, and tell us what you're going to do. Phosphorus is probably one of the bigger issues when it occurs in a great pond. And again, this is probably where DEP will be great help for you. There are all sorts of manuals that look at phosphorus loading. You want to take a look at what the subdivision itself is going to create, and maybe what's happening around the watershed and around other things. The calculations are, again, relatively complex, and they really need to be done by a qualified person. Again, it's my humble opinion that this is probably a very good area where municipalities should be looking at retaining some outside assistance to review what is being provided. So there are manuals available. Make sure you take a look at those. You want to be mapping that watershed. You want to be mapping and knowing what the calculations are. You also want to be looking at the methods of control. And again, I go back to the long-term maintenance. Everybody has great intentions. Yeah, we're putting these in. We're putting in our control measures. We have a long-term maintenance plan. Does it really happen? And I think you really want to work with the developer to say, here are some issues. Here are we see some issues. How do we do that? It may go back to the technical capacity of the developer, back in the other criteria that you look at. And a lot of times the code enforcement officers aren't the one that are reviewing these things. It is a third party inspector that is looking at the construction. The code enforcement officer, at least in our areas, is doing 12, 13 communities, does not have a lot of time to be going back 3, 4, 5 years down the road and saying, okay, how is this being maintained? So I think having a good, strong plan and a good, strong conversation with the developer of responsibility goes a long way to lessening some problems. This is one that we really haven't seen in Aroostook County, but if the proposed subdivision actually goes across municipal boundaries, how is it impacting that additional municipality? And especially when you're looking at traffic and maybe unsafe conditions to existing ways and those kind of things. This is where we would highly recommend a joint meeting between maybe a couple of the planning boards when you're reviewing the application. And that's certainly something that you can do. You may not be aware, but I mean, these small towns are certainly small enough. What are the conditions of the roads? What are the traffics? Work with with that community's maybe public works director, police chief, and those kind of things. So you want to make sure that, and you probably want to ask what the development plans of the community is. Does it actually fit where the community would like that subdivision to occur? I think maybe in Aroostook County, the public safety is probably a bigger issue, where we have shared ambulance and maybe shared fire departments and those kind of things. So you would most likely want the ambulance director or fire chief to be looking at the design of those criteria. And again, I guess the final criteria that we would want to look at is liquidation harvesting. Liquidation harvesting has been something that, I guess my opinion, kind of has gone away, but really it is, someone buying a parcel of land, stripping all of the marketable timber off, and then turning around and subdividing it for development. Kind of the cut and run mentality. It was pretty prevalent in Aroostook County, and then certainly a number of communities in the not too distant past. And those subdivisions really never sold. The review authority actually never really approved some things, but the developer was notorious in that, buying 40, 50, 60 acres and then basically making it a moonscape and putting in a road. The legislature has defined harvesting as the purchase of timberland followed by the harvest that removes most or all of the commercial value of standing timber, and not using long-term forest management principles, and then the sale or subsequent attempted resale of the harvested land within 5 years. There is help available in this particular instance. The municipality can ask the Bureau of Forestry at the Maine Department of Ag for assistance. They have 5 days to determine if assistance can be provided. They typically do that. And then if assistance can be provided, they have 30 days to provide their findings, and that will always be in writing. However, if it's not the case, the municipality can and should have the applicant provide a determination if liquidation forestry or harvesting has occurred from a licensed forester. And it really needs to be a licensed forester. It can't be Jay's cousin who's taken one class in forestry and said, yeah, that's not liquid. They really need to be licensed, under Title 32. And they will be looking at, forest practices and some things. So those, I believe, is my last slide, but those really are the 21. I went through them fairly quick, but I would certainly, I guess, try to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you, Jay. So we have a few questions, and I'll encourage John and Lee J to join in and to discuss as well as we transition here from this last presentation before our attorney speaks. So one question we received is whether there's a requirement to notify abutters in the adjoining community if the subdivision is fully located within one community.
I don't believe there is. I know that in the case of Mapleton, Castle Hill, and Chapman, they make it a practice to notify the abutting towns in a subdivision application and saying this is going to happen. But I think that's more of a courtesy rather than a requirement.
So I would agree, although I think that's probably a really good question for Attorney Phil to answer when we get to him. But what I do with the towns I work with down in the southern part of the state is, just say an abutter is an abutter is an abutter, and if abutters are required to be noticed, then even if they're in the abutting town, it's a courtesy. Make sure they get noticed, and to notice the town as well.
Oh, I hope maybe I misunderstood the question. I absolutely, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. We had a question about taking over a private road by the town. So I'll ask it. I don't know if there's a good answer to it, but when you have multiple subdivisions that have occurred over the past 30 years that utilize the same private road, How does the planning board manage this with regards to traffic and maintenance of said road? When does or should a town take over a private road within a subdivision related to traffic mostly?
Okay, or I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah, yep.
I've certainly have dealt with this issue before. There's a couple of layers of information here. One is that it depends on if it's a town or a city, or have a city council who establishes the policy, because many towns say if it's a private road, we're not taking it over, and other towns say, well, we'll consider it if it's been petitioned by the people living on it. So is the petition going to a select board or a council that has the authority, or does it have to go to town meeting? But beyond that, we always take the position that even if someone is wanting to take it over, does it meet the town's design standards? Because if it doesn't, then the requirement ought to be that that road be brought up to town standards by the private entity or the property owners that live on that road before the town is willing to take it over.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. More and more, we are seeing municipalities here develop road design and construction standards. They will not take over a private road unless it is to that standard. They've been burned way too many times.
Yep.
I would chime in. I don't think, in my opinion, a municipality should ever take over a private road, particularly if it was built by a subdivider. But, you know, there may be instances where it's applicable, but as a taxpayer of that town, I would, particularly if it required significant amount of money to upgrade it, I'd be voting against it because it was not the intent for the town to ever take care of that. So anyways, if it does take it over, then it does need to meet standards, but at least in municipalities that have town meeting, even on roads that were built, that if enough people raise their hands, that road's taken over, whether it's a dirt path or whatever. Yeah. So I think you need to be careful with that.
Yep, I agree. And right, wrong, or indifferent, and John will probably want to slap me upside the head. We've had a number of towns that are actually assisting developers with their road construction. They've been allowing developers to piggyback on maybe purchasing of materials and those kind of things. So they know that if it's going to go back to that municipality at some point in the future, it was at least designed in such a way and constructed in such a way that maybe there'll be some minimal expenses to the municipality.
Jay, I can understand that. You know, up in the county, I think municipalities, you know, need to do that to help things happen. But down here where we're having those, I don't think it's the case. You know, I think it's the same thing as if the town wants to extend water and sewer to a commercial subdivision. You know, that's fine if it helps achieve your economic goals.
Yep.
There's a question about liquidation harvesting. It says, we were told by the state forester that liquidation harvest applied to developers owning at least 100 acres of forest land in the state. He asks, how does that fit into this provision? And it may not.
I don't believe it does. I have not seen, I guess I have not personally seen kind of a size limit on parcels. Now
Yeah.
that
I've never dealt with that down our way at all.
yeah. I know that the case that I was referring to, I guess the developer was really looking at 20 to 50 acre lots, and that's what he what was purchasing, flattening, and then turning around and putting in 5 or 6 separate lots in that subdivision. So, I know that our state forester really was kind of pulling his hair out saying, you know, this is what's going on here. So, we're certainly well below the 100-acre, but I haven't seen it. Maybe something's changed.
Jay, do you think that with the adoption of the liquidation harvesting rules, and the other things, that the liquidation harvesting thing is sort of a thing of the past? I know why it was originally put in there, but with the rules and guidelines, do you think this is going away up in the county?
Yeah, I do. It really has, you know, probably in the last 10 years or so, you just don't even hear about it anymore. And I probably should say this carefully, but some of those old school people that were doing that have since, you know, passed away. So it's kind of, that mindset has changed a little bit too, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I think that rule was, you know, even down here, we had some people who'd come in and, you know, mow a couple 100 acres of woods, and then, as you said, divide it up in lots. But I don't see that happening anymore.
Nope.
There's another question that Lee J had answered, but I want to kind of expand the question. So the question had to do with potable water and the review criteria towards the beginning of your presentation, number 2 and 3, the sufficient water, and whether it was potable, because it doesn't specify that. And I'm curious to get some thoughts on the specificity of these review criteria, because there's quite a few review criteria that it doesn't mention other requirements, other agencies that might need to be involved in the process. You know, projects where it's outside of the floodplain that's mapped, and yet everybody knows that that area floods and now they're filling it. And so maybe it will have impact on neighbors. So I'm just kind of had more of a general question of, you know, this isn't the end all and be all, I guess, these review criteria, and if anyone wants to chime in and provide some guidance on that.
Well, the state review criteria for number 2 and number 3, sufficient water, the proposed subdivision has sufficient water available for the reasonably foreseeable needs of the subdivision. I have always taken that to mean that it's potable water. I can't imagine why you would not want that. Review criteria number 3 is municipal water supply. Proposed subdivision will not cause an unreasonable burden. So that's certainly, I guess, my humble opinion, should be potable water if it's a municipal water supply. I guess the rub is that to me, it seems pretty, maybe not clear, but I feel, yes, it is potable water. That's really why you have, well, I'm probably going to contradict myself, because, you know, that's why really we have, you know, well drillers, you know, providing some letter saying, yeah, I'm hitting water at 40, 50, 80 feet, whatever it is. I've drilled wells in the region. I think you want to be careful that, you know, maybe there's an issue with non-potable, and, you know, is there's some kind of contamination that you don't know about. I don't know, but my recommendation is, yeah, it's potable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jay in the sense that it's fine. It's number 2 is for those properties that are not on municipal water supplies, and number 3 is for those properties that are being provided water through the municipal water supply. What it doesn't get to is, when we define potable, you know, what is the water quality?
Right.
I mean, you know, does it have arsenic in it? Is it drinkable? But the real question is, can the site provide adequate water for that home or that subdivision? Beyond that, I'd be leaving it up to Attorney Phil to argue that in court somewhere at some point.
think that's a good answer.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I always looked at the quality and quantity of that criteria. And down in our area, we've got some, you can get water pretty much in, bedrock, whatever, depending on how much you want to spend and how deep you want to go and that stuff. We've had some problems with the quality of that groundwater, where it's been very expensive for the potential homeowners to treat that because of iron and other things. Not that it can't be treated, but it's very expensive. And I think a couple planning boards have made either notes or conditions relating to the treatment of that groundwater.
Look, I mean, I live in a development where there's public water supply to my development. However, it's got one of the highest PFAS counts in the state. So, I mean, did they provide water from a public water system? Yeah. I didn't know at the time I purchased in here that I had one of the highest PFAS counts in the state, but it's like, what do you do? The developer met the requirements by the town saying, yes, they have water for the foreseeable future. It's a tough situation. So now all I do is buy all my water from Poland Spring.
There you go.
Because, I'm not going to be drinking that water.
Those were all the questions we had. Thank you so much for the three of you taking those questions.